I stayed awake for 96 hours to prove the theory was wrong. The theory was not wrong. This is not a horror story. That is the first thing you need to understand before I tell you what happened. There are no monsters in this story, no supernatural events, no moments where something reaches out of the dark and touches you on the shoulder. Everything that occurred during those 96 hours has a clinical explanation. Neurologists have names for it. Sleep researchers have documented it in controlled environments. The literature is dense and specific and completely terrifying if you read enough of it, which I did, which is exactly how this started. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I am a person who does not like being told what to believe without evidence. I have always been this way. At school it made me difficult. At university it made me good at arguing. In adult life it made me the kind of person who reads the footnotes, checks the citations, and sends emails to researchers asking whether their sample sizes were adequate. So when a psychologist told me at a dinner party that the human mind begins to break after 72 hours without sleep, not metaphorically break, literally break in ways that are functionally indistinguishable from acute psychosis, I did what I always do. I decided to prove him wrong. I should tell you what the theory actually says, because this matters. The standard position in sleep research is this. After approximately 24 hours without sleep, cognitive function degrades measurably. After 48 hours, the body begins producing stress hormones at levels associated with severe anxiety disorders. After 72 hours, 3 days, the brain begins generating its own stimulation to compensate for the absence of the dream state it has been denied. It does this by blurring the boundary between sleeping and waking. It inserts REM activity into consciousness. In plain language, you begin to hallucinate, not vaguely. Not the shimmer at the edge of vision that everyone has experienced during a long night. Fully formed hallucinations, indistinguishable in detail and emotional weight from real experience, occurring in a mind that is convinced it is awake and rational. The psychologist said that no amount of willpower, intelligence, or self-awareness changes this. The brain does not care how smart you are. It does not care that you know what is happening. It simply runs the process regardless, the way your heart beats regardless of whether you have told it to. I told him this was an extraordinary claim that required extraordinary evidence. He looked at me across the dinner table and said the evidence was extensive, well replicated, and freely available to anyone willing to read it. I told him I would read it. I read it. Then I decided to run my own experiment anyway, because reading about something and experiencing it are two different categories of knowledge, and I have always trusted the latter more. This was my first mistake. Hour 0, Saturday, 8 a.m. I set up a camera in the corner of my living room pointing at the couch. I told 3 people what I was doing, a friend, my sister, and the psychologist himself, who responded to my message with a single sentence, "Please have someone with you after hour 48. I did not arrange for someone to be with me after hour 48. I noted his concern and filed it under excessive caution, which is where I file most things people tell me about my own limitations. The rules I set for myself were simple. No sleep, obviously. No napping, no closing eyes for more than 30 seconds, no lying down. Caffeine was permitted in normal quantities. I didn't want to introduce another variable. Food and water as needed. I would check in on camera every 4 hours with a short verbal report of my current cognitive state, date and time, and a series of standard tests, arithmetic, pattern recognition, a paragraph read aloud from a book chosen at random. I was calm. I was prepared. I was, looking back, completely ignorant of what prepared means in this context. The first 24 hours were nothing. I want to be honest about this because it fed my confidence in a way that became dangerous. I stayed awake through the first night with no particular difficulty. I read, I worked, I watched things, I made notes. By Sunday morning I had been awake for 24 hours and felt, genuinely, fine. Slightly tired in the way that one extra coffee resolves. Alert, functional, mildly proud of myself. I filmed my 24-hour check-in. In the footage, which I have since watched many times, I look completely normal. I read the paragraph correctly. I do the arithmetic. I make a small joke about the psychologist being wrong. I am smiling. Hour 24 to hour 48. Sunday passes. This is harder to describe because the experience of time begins to change around hour 30 in a way that is not dramatic but is deeply strange. The best analogy I can offer is that time becomes thick, not slow. thick. Each hour has weight in a way that hours don't normally have weight. You become aware of the passing of minutes in a way you're never aware of during normal life, when minutes simply disappear into experience without being felt. By Sunday afternoon, I notice that I'm making small errors I would not normally make. I pour coffee into a mug that already has coffee in it. I start a sentence and cannot locate the word I need for it. Not an unusual word, a simple word, a word I use daily. And stand in the kitchen for 30 seconds waiting for it to arrive. It arrives. But the 30 seconds is new. I film my 48-hour check-in, Sunday evening. I read the paragraph. I make 2 small errors, correct them immediately, note them for the record. The arithmetic takes slightly longer than before. I still look in the footage, essentially normal. Tired around the eyes, but present. I think about the psychologist's message. I decide I don't need anyone here. I finish the coffee. I start another pot. I settle in for the second night. Hour 48 to hour 72. I need you to understand something about this section. I have attempted to write it several times. I have the camera footage, which I watched in full after the experiment ended, and I have my own memory of these hours, and these 2 sources of information do not fully agree with each other, not in small ways. In ways that I find, even now, difficult to discuss without a specific kind of unease that has no precise name. What I remember of Monday is a series of moments separated by gaps, not gaps where I fell asleep. The footage confirms I did not sleep. Gaps where something was happening that did not fully register as experience at the time, and has not fully registered as memory since. I was present in the room. The camera shows me present in the room, but I was not. Attending, in the way that I had been attending, during the first 48 hours. Something behind the attention had quietly stepped back. Around hour 58, I call my friend. I have no memory of making this call. My friend tells me later that I spoke to her for 11 minutes about a conversation we had had when we were both 19 years old, a specific conversation that she does not remember at all. I apparently described it in precise detail. The location, the weather, what she was wearing, what she had said. She told me she found the call unsettling because of how certain I was about a memory she had no access to. She almost drove over. She decided I sounded functional enough. She was making that assessment based on my voice. She could not see my face. Around hour 63, I film an unscheduled check-in. I don't remember doing this either. In the footage, I'm sitting very close to the camera, closer than makes sense for the setup. I am looking slightly to the left of the lens rather than into it. I speak for 4 minutes. I will not transcribe what I say here because I have listened to it twice, and am not going to listen to it again. I will say that the content is coherent. It is not nonsense, not rambling, but the subject matter is something I have no conscious connection to and cannot account for. I sound calm. I sound certain. I sound like a person describing something they are watching happen in front of them, in real time, that the camera cannot see. At hour 72, I film the scheduled check-in. I read the paragraph. I make 7 errors. I correct none of them. I do not appear to notice them. The arithmetic. I write down an answer. The answer is not close to correct. I look at it for a moment. I nod, as if confirming it. I say to the camera, everything is fine. The theory is wrong. I feel completely normal. Then I sit back on the couch and stare at the wall for 23 minutes without moving. The camera records all of this. I have no memory of any of it. Hour 72 to hour 96. This is the part people ask about. This is the part I find most difficult to describe with the precision I want to give it, because precision requires access to the experience, and my access to what happened between hour 72 and hour 90 is limited in ways that concern me. I will tell you what the camera shows. At some point in the early hours of Tuesday morning, I stand up from the couch, walk to the window, and stand looking out of it for a long time. The street outside is empty. This is consistent with what you would expect at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. What is not consistent with anything I can explain is that I begin to speak to something outside the window, in a low and conversational tone, as if responding to questions being asked of me. I cannot hear what I'm responding to. There is nothing outside the window. I do this for roughly 12 minutes, nodding occasionally, once shaking my head firmly, once laughing very quietly at something. Then I return to the couch and sit down. I have no memory of any of this. What I remember of Tuesday is fragments. A smell, something specific, something that has no source in the apartment, something I associate with a particular place from my childhood that I have not visited in 15 years. A sound. Not a loud sound, not a frightening sound. A sound like someone in the next room shifting their weight in a chair. I checked the next room. There was nothing in the next room. I knew there was nothing in the next room. I checked 3 more times. I remember, with complete clarity, a conversation I had with my father on Tuesday afternoon. I remember where he was sitting. I remember what he was wearing. I remember the specific thing he said to me, which was something I had needed to hear for a long time and had never heard him say in real life. My father died 6 years ago. The conversation lasted, in my memory, approximately 20 minutes. The camera shows me sitting alone on the couch, completely still, looking at the empty chair across from me for 20 minutes. I want to be careful here about what I claim and what I do not claim. I am not telling you my father was in the room. I am telling you my brain, deprived of sleep, deprived of the dream state in which it normally processes grief and memory and the things it cannot resolve during waking hours, generated the experience of his presence with a completeness and a fidelity that waking experience has never matched. I heard his voice. I felt the specific emotional texture of being in a room with him. I was, for those 20 minutes, not performing the memory of my father. I was simply with him, and then I wasn't, and the chair was empty. And I understood, with a clarity that cut through everything, that the psychologist had been completely right, and that I had been completely wrong, and that the most humbling thing about this understanding was that it had arrived via an experience that my rational mind could not fully defend against or explain away, because to explain it away would require accessing a level of objectivity that the experiment itself had temporarily dismantled. At hour 90, I called the psychologist. He answered immediately, which meant he had been waiting for this call. I told him I was stopping at 96 hours. Not because I couldn't continue, because I didn't want to find out what hour 97 looked like. He said that was the most rational decision I had made in 4 days. I slept at exactly hour 96, Sunday 8 a.m. to Tuesday 8 a.m. to the minute, 4 full days. I had arranged an alarm for that exact moment so I would know with precision when I had hit the mark. I fell asleep within 2 minutes of setting it, not gradually, not drifting. One moment I was awake and the next I was gone, as if a switch had been thrown, as if my body had been waiting with its hand on the lever for the permission to finally fall. I slept for 19 hours. When I woke up, it was Wednesday afternoon, and the light through the window was the specific low amber of a late autumn afternoon, and it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. That ordinary light, that completely ordinary light through a window I had looked at 1,000 times before without feeling anything particular about it. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I reviewed the footage. I watched myself stand at the window talking to something that wasn't there. I watched myself sit across from an empty chair for 20 minutes. I watched myself film 4 minutes of content I cannot account for and nod at an arithmetic answer that was completely wrong. And I thought about what the psychologist had said at the dinner party. Not the claim itself, but the phrasing of it. He had not said the mind breaks. He had said the mind begins to break down the barrier between sleeping and waking. That is a different claim, and the difference matters. The barrier is not a weakness, it is a structure. It keeps the dreaming self and the waking self in their separate rooms so that each can do what it needs to do without interfering with the other. When you deny the brain sleep long enough, it stops maintaining the barrier because it cannot afford to. It needs to run the dream process, and it will run it wherever it can find the space. What I experienced in that chair, across from the empty chair, was not a hallucination in the sense that the word is usually used. It was a dream. A completely ordinary dream of the kind my brain generates every night when it is allowed to do its work, inserted into waking consciousness because the brain had run out of other options. The content of the dream, my father, what he said, the specific thing that I needed to hear, was not random. It was curated by the same system that curates dreams every night. The system is not broken. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. It just had to do it in a place it was never supposed to occupy. The psychologist came for dinner on Friday. I cooked. I told him he had been right. He said he knew. I asked him how many times he had seen this pattern, someone running the experiment to disprove the theory and instead encountering it directly. He thought about it for a moment. He said every time. He said in 30 years of practice he had never met anyone who went far enough to meet the evidence and came back unconvinced. I asked him why he keeps telling people at dinner parties if he knows they are going to go home and lose their minds for 4 days. He smiled. He said that was the only way the information ever becomes real. He said, you cannot be told your way into understanding certain things. You can only be walked there. I think about that a lot. The theory, for the record, is not wrong. The theory is so correct that it can afford to wait. It does not need you to believe it in advance. It simply sits there in the literature, patient and well documented, and waits for the people who need to find out for themselves to arrive at exactly the conclusion the research predicted they would reach. I am one of those people now. I do not recommend becoming one. But I understand, better than I did before, why some knowledge only comes the hard way. And I understand, better than I did before, what my father would have said if I had told him about this. I heard it after all. In an empty chair on a Tuesday afternoon, somewhere between asleep and awake. I heard every word.